The tea had gone cold again. Kate noticed it the way she noticed most things in those days, quietly, without complaint, pressing the ceramic cup between both palms, as though the warmth she remembered might still be hiding somewhere inside the clay. It was not. The fire in the hearth had burned low overnight, and the morning air inside the cottage carried the bite of early autumn, threading through the gaps in the shuttered window like a whisper she could never quite silence. She set the cup down on the worn wooden table and listened. Twin voices, still half-tangled in sleep, murmured from behind the curtain that divided the cottage's single room. Small sounds, safe sounds, the kind that had kept her breathing for 5 years when nothing else had. She rose before they woke. She always did. And pulled her gray wool cloak from the hook by the door, wrapping it around her linen gown in one practiced motion. Her long blonde braid fell over one shoulder, still loose from the night, and she left it that way. There was no one to impress in the village of Ashfen. There never had been. Outside, the world smelled of pine resin, damp soil, and the faint sweetness of late wildflowers surrendering to the cold. Ashfen sat at the edge of the grey-wood forest, 3 days' hard ride from the nearest city of consequence, which was precisely why Kate had chosen it. The villagers were farmers and weavers and old herbalists who asked few questions and accepted silver coin without curiosity. In 5 years, she had become simply the healer woman on the hill, foreign, quiet, competent. Nothing more. She preferred nothing more. The morning market was already stirring when she reached the village square, a cluster of rough-hewn stalls draped with burlap and heavy linen. She exchanged dried lavender bundles for a wheel of hard cheese, traded a pouch of fever root tincture for 2 loaves of dark bread, and accepted a small pot of honeyed preserves from old Marin, the beekeeper's widow, who always smelled of beeswax and kindness. "Your boys well?" Marin asked, pressing the pot into Kate's hands without waiting for payment. "They are." Kate smiled, small, careful, genuine. "They found a nest of field mice yesterday and tried to convince me it was a reasonable pet situation." Marin laughed, a full, rolling sound. "Boys." "Boys," Kate agreed, and the word landed in her chest the way it always did, tender and terrifying in equal measure. She was walking back up the hill path, arms full, when the feeling struck her. It was not new, this feeling. It had visited her before, usually in the deep of night, when the boys slept, and the cottage was too quiet, and the darkness had too much room to breathe. It was a pressure behind her sternum, low and persistent, like a string drawn too tight between 2 points, like something pulling, like something remembering. She stopped walking. The forest ahead was still. The wind had dropped. Even the bird song had gone absent in the way it sometimes did before a storm, or before something else entirely. Kate pressed her free hand flat against her collarbone and breathed. "Don't," she told herself, the way she had told herself 1,000 times before. "Don't go back there. That night is finished. He doesn't know. He will never know. You made certain of it." She walked faster. The boys were awake when she returned, sitting at the table with the focused, dangerous energy of 5-year-olds who had been unsupervised long enough to develop a plan. Reese, the elder by 4 minutes, had his father's dark hair, black as crow wings, thick, already threatening to curl, and Kate's pale blue eyes, wide and reading everything. Emery had the same dark hair but softer features, rounder, more expressive, with a habit of tilting his head when he was thinking that made her throat close every single time, because she had seen that exact gesture performed by someone else, in candlelight, 5 years ago, in a life she had burned down to cinders and fled. "Mama," Reese said very seriously, "we need a dog." "You need breakfast," she said, setting the bread and cheese on the table. "A dog and breakfast," Emery countered. She kissed the top of his head, then Reese's. They smelled of sleep and straw, and something uniquely themselves, warm, faintly animal, already carrying in their small bodies the particular scent of something she could not name but recognized, had always recognized. She simply refused to speak it aloud. She cut the bread and said nothing about dogs. And the morning moved forward the way mornings do, when the person holding them together has decided that forward is the only direction that matters. It was the afternoon that broke her. She had been in the small garden behind the cottage, pulling the last of the summer root vegetables from the dark earth, hands dirty to the wrist, back aching pleasantly, when she heard hooves on the road below. Not one horse, several, riding at pace. Travelers passed through Ashfin rarely, and when they did, they came from the west. Merchants, pilgrims, the occasional wandering healer seeking fresh herbs. These horses were coming from the east, from the direction of the capital. Kate straightened slowly, pressing the heel of one muddy hand to the small of her back, and looked down through the garden's low stone wall toward the road. 5 riders, dark cloaks, the kind of cloaks that were not chosen for warmth but for anonymity, heavy, deliberately undistinguished. But the horses were wrong for merchants. Too large, too well-bred, moving with the particular controlled power of animals trained for war. And the lead rider sat in the saddle the way only one kind of man sat, like the horse was fortunate to carry him. Kate did not breathe. The riders slowed as they entered the village square below. She watched the lead rider, broad across the shoulders, something that caught at her memory like a hook, turn his head slowly, scanning. Not the idle glance of a traveler seeking a tavern. Something deliberate, methodical. He's looking for something. She told herself it meant nothing. There were hundreds of men of large build in the kingdom, hundreds of riders who came from the east. She told herself this firmly, the way she had trained herself to tell herself things firmly over 5 long years. Then the lead rider removed his hood. The air left her body. Black braided hair, the length of it falling past his shoulders. A jaw like carved stone, set with quiet authority. Even at this distance, across a village square, she knew those shoulders. She knew the way he held himself, perfectly still, utterly aware, as though stillness were not the absence of motion, but the purest form of power. She had spent one night in a room full of candlelight, trying to believe he was ordinary, and had failed completely. Cassian, the Alpha King. Here, in Ashfin. 3 days from anywhere that mattered. Her hands were shaking. She realized this abstractly, the way you realize a candle has gone out. After the fact, in the sudden cold. The carrots she had been holding were now on the ground. She did not remember dropping them. From inside the cottage, she heard Reese laugh at something Emery had said, bright and unguarded, the sound carrying clean through the afternoon air. And she saw the Alpha King's head turn, not toward the cottage, not yet, but toward the sound. The precise, instinctive turn of a wolf who has heard something his blood already knows. Kate moved before she had decided to move. She was through the garden gate, into the cottage, pulling the door shut behind her in 3 heartbeats. She crossed to the boys and crouched in front of them, her dirty hands cupping both their faces with a steadiness she did not feel, making herself look at them, at Reese's dark eyes and Emery's tilted head, making herself breathe. "Listen to me," she said, very quietly. "We are going to play the quiet game, right now. Can you do that?" They looked at her with the particular sharp attention children reserve for when adults are genuinely frightened. "Yes, Mama," Reese said. No argument, no negotiation. She kissed his forehead. She kissed Emery's. Then she rose and went to the window and looked down at the square, where the Alpha King was already dismounting, and the afternoon light was catching the leather straps across his chest, and old Marin was pointing, with her kind beeswax-scented hand, with her answering questions without being, asked generosity, pointing directly up the hill, toward the cottage, toward Kate. 5 years, she thought. 5 years was not enough. She had 12 minutes, perhaps less. Kate knew this the way she knew most things now. Not through calculation, but through the particular instinct that 5 years of quiet vigilance had carved into her bones. She had learned to read distance and pace and intention the way a hunted animal learns to read wind. And the wind, right now, was carrying the sound of boots on the village path below, deliberate and unhurried, which was somehow worse than if he had run. Running would have meant anger. That measured pace meant certainty. She moved fast and silent through the cottage, pulling the boys' warmest wool tunics from the chest at the foot of the sleeping pallet, their small leather boots, the travel satchel she kept packed behind the flour barrel. Had always kept packed, had always told herself she was being overly cautious. Had always known she was not. "Mama," Emery whispered, because the quiet game had a question in it now. "Are we going somewhere?" "We are visiting Widow Holt," Kate said. This was not entirely a lie. Widow Holt lived at the far edge of Ashvin, and her back door opened onto the forest path north. "Put your boots on, love, quickly." Reese was already pulling his on, watching her with those pale blue eyes that saw too much for a boy of 5. He had always been like that. Born observing, born measuring, born with a stillness that had nothing to do with Kate, and everything to do with the blood she had spent 5 years pretending he had not inherited. She swung the satchel over her shoulder, pulled her gray cloak from the hook, and had her hand on the door when someone knocked. Not urgently. 3 measured strikes of a gauntleted fist against old wood. The kind of knock that was not really a question. Kate stood perfectly still. The boys looked at her. She looked at the door. The latch did not move. He was waiting. That was the cruelest part. He was simply waiting, as though he had all the time in the world. As though he already knew she was standing 2 feet away with her heart hammering against her ribs and her hand frozen on the strap of a bag she had packed for exactly this moment. She set the satchel down, smoothed the front of her cloak, turned to the boys with a calm she constructed deliberately, like placing stones one by one across moving water. "Sit at the table," she said softly. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Can you do that for me?" 2 small nods. They climbed onto the bench and folded their hands with the solemn gravity of children who understood, without understanding, that something important was happening. Kate opened the door. He was larger than she remembered. Or perhaps she had simply spent 5 years shrinking the memory of him down to something survivable, and now the real version refused to cooperate. He stood in the doorway of her small cottage the way a mountain stands at the edge of a valley. Not threatening, exactly, but impossible to ignore, reorienting everything around itself simply by existing. Black braided hair fell past his shoulders, threaded with a single leather cord. His eyes were the particular shade of blue that reminded her of deep water in winter, cold on the surface, carrying unknown depths below. The leather straps across his chest were worn from real use, not ceremony. There was a small scar along his jaw that she did not remember, and found she could not stop noticing. He was looking at her with an expression she could not name. Not anger, not triumph, something more careful than either. "Kate," he said. Just her name. Nothing attached to it. No accusation, no title, no demand. Just her name and his voice, which was lower than she had allowed herself to remember, and which did something inconvenient to the careful architecture of her composure. "My lord," she said, because formality was the only armor she had left. Something shifted in his expression. Brief, barely visible, quickly controlled. "May I come in?" he asked. The question surprised her. She did not know what she had expected. Commands, perhaps. Declarations. The full weight of a king's authority arriving at her door like a siege. Not a question. Not that particular stillness in his voice, as though he genuinely intended to wait for her answer. She stepped back. Not in welcome, precisely. In calculation. He stepped inside, and the cottage, already small, became somehow smaller. He did not look around the room immediately. He looked at her, just for a moment, the way a man looks at something he has been searching for and is not yet certain how to hold. Then he looked at the table. Kate watched him see them. She had imagined this moment in 100 different forms over 5 years, always in the dark, always with dread, always cut short before she had to witness his face. She had not imagined this, the way his breath simply stopped, the way the authority that lived in every line of his body seemed for one unguarded instant to dissolve entirely. He was not an Alpha King in that moment. He was a man encountering something that rearranged the world. Rhys and Emery sat at the table with their hands folded, watching the stranger with identical expressions of careful assessment. Cassian did not move. The silence lasted long enough that Emery, who had always been the less patient of the two, tilted his head and said very politely, "Good day, sir." The sound that came from Cassian was not quite a word. He pressed it back immediately, jaw tightening, control reasserting itself. But Kate had heard it. The fracture of it. The way 2 syllables had almost escaped him and hadn't. He turned to look at her. "How old?" he said, and his voice was very quiet. "This is not the conversation we are having in front of them," Kate said, equally quiet. For a moment, one suspended, airless moment, she thought he might refuse. He was the Alpha King. He did not accept boundaries from Omegas and cottages at the edge of forgotten forests. Every instinct she had told her he was about to make clear exactly who held authority in this doorway. Instead, he turned back to the boys. Crouched down to their level, which brought him from imposing to merely large, and regarded them with an expression that Kate had no category for. "What are your names?" he asked. "Rhys," said Rhys. "Emery," said Emery. "I am Cassian," he said, as though it were simply a name, as though he were not the most powerful shifter in 6 kingdoms. Emery tilted his head, that gesture, that terrible familiar gesture, and said, "You have very long hair." "I do," Cassian agreed gravely. "Mama has long hair too," Rhys observed, with the evaluative air of someone establishing credentials. "I noticed," Cassian said, and did not look at Kate, which was somehow worse than if he had. He rose, straightened. The brief softness folded back into composure as he turned to face her, and the Alpha King was present again. Contained, deliberate, unreadable. But Kate had seen the fracture, and she could not unsee it. "Is there somewhere the boys might go?" he said, "for a short while?" Kate hesitated. The satchel was still on the floor where she had dropped it. The boots she had been about to put on her children were still in her hands. "Old Marin," she said finally, "at the market stall. They know her." She helped the boys into their cloaks, keeping her movements steady and her face arranged into the expression she wore when she needed them to feel safe. She walked them down to the square herself, holding one hand of each, and left them with Marin under the pretense of an errand. Marin, who asked no questions, who pressed honeyed sweets into small palms and winked at Kate with the wisdom of a woman who had seen enough of the world to understand when a mother needed a few minutes. Walking back up the hill alone, Kate allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something close to panic. 30 seconds of acknowledging that the thing she had fled was standing in her cottage, and that she had no more roads to take. That Ashvin had been the last road, and she had reached the end of it. Then she stopped, breathed the pine-cold air, looked up at the sky, gray now, carrying the smell of coming rain. "You always knew," she told herself. "You always knew he would find you eventually. You simply hoped eventually would be someone else's problem." She went back inside. Cassian was standing at the hearth, not touching anything, simply standing with his hands behind his back and his eyes on the low fire. He turned when she entered. 5 years, he said. 5 years, she confirmed. You vanished the morning after the harvest ball. His voice was measured. I had men searching for 3 of them. I was told you left the capital of your own will. I was told... He stopped, began again. I was told many things. Some of them were probably true, Kate said. Were you in danger? Direct. No preamble. She looked at him across the small room, in the gray light of a coming storm, and considered lying. She was very good at lying. She had been lying, in one form or another, for 5 years. Yes, she said instead. Because some truths, once you are standing inside them, refuse to be redirected. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. Something dark and very still. Tell me, he said. And the rain began. The rain came in hard against the shutters, filling the silence between them with something that was almost a mercy. Kate sat at the table, the same table where her sons had folded their hands 20 minutes ago, and kept her cloak on, because removing it would have felt like conceding something she was not prepared to concede. Cassian remained standing near the hearth, which she understood was not carelessness, but consideration. He was keeping distance, giving her room. She noticed this and distrusted it, because men who understood how to manage space were more dangerous than men who did not. The harvest ball, she began, and the words tasted like 5-year-old ash. I was not there by accident. I know, he said quietly. You were invited as part of the Omega presentation, Lord Aldrich's ward. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Lord Aldrich. Her guardian since the age of 9, when her parents had died of the gray fever that swept the eastern provinces. The man who had fed her, housed her, educated her, smiled at her across his long dinner table, while teaching her the particular form of gratitude that has no exit. Lord Aldrich, with his silver rings and his careful voice, and his habit of placing one hand on her shoulder in public to demonstrate ownership, without ever calling it that. He presented me at the ball because he needed me presented, Kate said. Not for the usual reasons. Not to find a match, not to elevate his household's standing with the crown. She paused. The rain made its argument against the shutters. He had a debt, an old one, owed to Lord Fenwick of the Western Reaches. Fenwick had been demanding settlement for 2 seasons, and Aldrich had nothing left to offer him. Cassian said nothing. His eyes did not leave her face. Except me, Kate said. My mother's bloodline carries a rare Omega strain, the kind that amplifies a pack's fertility, stabilizes a weakened bond line, increases the strength of the next generation. Fenwick's pack had been declining for a decade. 3 alphas in his line had failed to produce viable heirs. He needed what my blood carried. She kept her voice flat and factual, the way she had learned to speak about this, as though it were something that had happened to someone else, in another country, a long time ago. Aldrich had promised me to Fenwick as a breeding arrangement, not a mating, not a bond, an arrangement, contracted in writing, sealed before I was ever brought to the capital. The fire in the hearth popped. Cassian had gone very still. I did not know, Kate continued, until the night of the ball. I overheard it. In the corridor outside Lord Aldrich's private chambers, 2 hours before midnight, while I was returning from the gardens. She could still smell it. Candle tallow and boot leather, and the sour, sweet rot of spilled wine from the celebration below, and her own heartbeat so loud in her ears she had been amazed neither man had heard it. Aldrich was finalizing the terms with Fenwick's emissary. The contract would activate the morning after the ball. I was to be taken to the Western Reaches within the fortnight. She stopped, looked at her hands on the table. The faint stain of this morning's garden soil still lived in the creases of her knuckles. And then? Cassian said. His voice was very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not calm, but the thing that lives underneath it. And then I made a terrible decision, Kate said. Or perhaps the only decision I had. I am still not certain which. She did not elaborate immediately, because the next part required her to look at him directly, and she had been carefully not doing that. Now she made herself. Those winter water eyes were watching her with an intensity that had no aggression in it, just focus, complete and unnerving. I could not go back to Aldrich's rooms that night, she said. If I went back, I would be watched until the transfer. I had no coin of my own, no horse, no contacts outside the capital. I had nothing. She paused. Except that I had danced with the AlphaKing at the harvest ball, and he had... She stopped again. Something pulled across her face that she controlled before it could become anything readable. You were kind, she said finally, choosing the most careful word available. You spoke to me as though I had thoughts worth hearing. You offered to show me the map room, and I said yes, and we talked until the candles burned low, and... Kate. And I made a choice I have never regretted and never spoken aloud, she finished evenly, because the alternative was Fenwick. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Heavier, more honest. You left before dawn, Cassian said. I left before the household woke. I took only what I could carry in my cloak pockets. I had enough silver from the ball's gift purse, the one given to all presented Omegas, to buy passage on a wool merchant's cart heading north. I changed direction twice. I stopped in 4 different villages before Ashfin. She met his gaze. I made certain you could not find me. You made certain very well, he said, and there was something in it that was not quite bitterness and not quite admiration, and was entirely uncomfortable. I did not know, Kate said carefully, until 3 months after I arrived in Ashfin, that there were 2 of them. She watched him absorb this. The precise, controlled way his chest expanded on a slow breath, the slight tension along his jaw. And you chose silence, he said. Not an accusation, but not an accusation. I chose survival, Kate said. Lord Aldrich would have used them. If he had known, if anyone connected to the capital had known, they would have been leverage. They would have been contracts, the way I was a contract. I was an Omega with no pack, no protection, no standing, and 2 infants whose father was the AlphaKing. She kept her voice steady through this because she had rehearsed it in her own head 1,000 times. What exactly would you have had me do? He was quiet for a long moment. Come to me, he said. You were the AlphaKing surrounded by a court full of people with interests. I did not know which of them were Aldrich's allies. I did not know how far his contracts reached. I did not know. She stopped. Began again, more honestly. I did not know if you would believe me. The admission cost her something. She felt it leave. Cassian crossed the room. Not quickly. Not with any appearance of intention, until he was standing at the other side of the table, close enough that she could smell pine resin and cold leather and something beneath that. The particular warmth of a shifter's presence, which her Omega instincts had never stopped recognizing no matter how firmly she had instructed them to. He did not sit. He placed both hands flat on the table and looked at her steadily. Lord Aldrich died 14 months ago, he said. Kate blinked. This was not what she had expected. His debts finally outran his protections, Cassian continued. The council stripped his titles. His estate was seized. Lord Fenwick's alliance collapsed with it. Fenwick faced his own investigation shortly after. A pause. The contract he held on you was among the documents recovered. It was the document that led my investigators eventually to understand why you had fled. Kate stared at him. You knew about the contract, she said slowly. I have known for 7 months, he said. 7 months. The words rearranged something in her chest. She thought of 7 months of rain against these shutters, 7 months of bread baking and root pulling, and Reese's laugh and Emery's tilted head. 7 months of believing herself hidden and safe, while somewhere in the capital a king had been sitting with her secret in his hands. "Why did it take 7 months to find me?" she asked. "Because I did not want to send men," he said simply. "I did not want you to open your door to soldiers. I came myself." He held her gaze. "I owe you that much." Kate looked at him for a long time. The rain was easing now, softening from hard drumming to a quieter, more persistent sound against the stone. The fire had settled into steady warmth. "Cassian," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name, and they both noticed it. "What is it you want from us?" He straightened, and the answer he gave was not what she had steeled herself against. Not command, not legal claim, not the authority of blood and title closing around her like a fist. "I want the chance," he said quietly, "to be something other than a stranger to my sons, and I want—" He paused, and for a moment the Alpha King entirely vacated his expression and left only a man standing in a small cottage in the rain. "I want to know if you are safe. Truly. At last." Kate looked away first. Outside, somewhere in the village square, she could hear the distant sound of Emery laughing at something old Marin had said. She did not answer him yet. But she did not ask him to leave. She did not sleep that night. Cassian's 4 riders had made camp at the village inn, a low-ceilinged establishment that smelled of tallow and barley ale, run by a taciturn man named Osbert, who asked no questions about the quality of horses tied outside his stable. Cassian himself had been offered a room and had accepted it without ceremony, which had surprised Kate more than anything else he had done that day. She had half expected him to refuse, to insist on proximity, to make his presence felt in the particular way powerful men made their presence felt, through imposition rather than invitation. Instead, he had walked down the hill in the rain, with the same measured pace he had arrived with, turned once at the bottom of the path, and looked up at her in the doorway. "I will come in the morning," he had said. Not a request, but not a command either. Something in between, the kind of statement that acknowledges another person's right to prepare. She had nodded. He had gone. Now she lay in the dark, listening to her sons breathe, one on each side of her on the wide sleeping pallet. Reese curled inward and Emery sprawled with total physical confidence, and she stared at the low ceiling and thought about 7 months. 7 months of him knowing. 7 months of him choosing how to arrive. She had spent 5 years constructing a version of Cassian in her memory that she could live with, not a villain, because she was honest enough to refuse that particular comfort, but a distant figure. A king in a candlelit room who had been briefly, genuinely kind, and who belonged to a world so far above her own that the distance itself was a kind of protection. She had needed him to be a portrait, not a person. Portraits do not walk 3 days from the capital alone to knock quietly on a cottage door. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth in the dark and breathed through it. He wants to know his sons, she told herself. That is what this is. That is all this needs to be. But the look on his face when he had crouched at the table, the fracture of it, the unguarded instant before control reasserted itself. That was not the face of a man calculating political advantage. She knew what calculated looked like. She had grown up watching Lord Aldrich perform warmth across a dinner table. She knew the difference. She simply did not know what to do with the difference. Morning came gray and cold, and smelling of wet pine. Kate rose before the boys, built the fire up, and put water on to boil. She plaited her hair in the small looking glass by the window, blonde, still long, threaded now with the faintest suggestion of something harder than the girl who had stood in a candlelit map room 5 years ago, and told herself that whatever happened today, she would not be afraid. She was afraid. She was also, underneath the fear, Something else. Something she had not had room for in 5 years of survival. Something that felt dangerously like the desire to be seen clearly by someone capable of seeing. She set that aside with the efficiency of long practice and sliced the bread. Cassian arrived as the boys were finishing their breakfast, his knock carrying the same 3 measured strikes as the day before. Reese went to the door before Kate could stop him, moved with the quick, fearless confidence that had been alarming her since he learned to walk, and pulled it open himself. Cassian looked down at him. Reese looked up. "You came back," Reese observed. "I said I would come in the morning," Cassian said. "Mama says people who keep small promises keep large ones too," Reese said, with the air of someone delivering a test result. Something moved at the corner of Cassian's mouth. "Your mother is wise." Reese considered this with appropriate gravity, then stepped back to allow him entry. Kate caught Cassian's eyes over the boy's head and looked away before either of them could make anything of the moment. The morning that followed was the strangest of Kate's life, and her life had contained several strong contenders for that title. Cassian sat at the table, filling the bench that had always been empty on that side, and allowed Emery to show him, in exhaustive and largely inaccurate detail, the rock collection he kept in a leather pouch beneath the sleeping pallet. Each stone was presented with its full history, where it had been found, what it resembled, what powers Emery had assigned it based on criteria he was willing to defend. "This one is for protection," Emery said, placing a smooth gray riverstone in Cassian's large palm, "because it is heavy and gray and serious." "Like a good shield," Cassian said seriously. Emery pointed at him. "Exactly." Reese, who expressed affection through proximity rather than conversation, had migrated to sitting on the bench beside Cassian without announcement or explanation, close enough that their arms nearly touched, pretending to be very interested in a piece of wood he was turning in his hands. Kate washed the breakfast bowls and watched all of this with the particular agony of someone witnessing something irreversible. She had protected them from this, from him, for 5 years. She had told herself it was the only choice. She had believed it completely. Watching Emery correct Cassian's assessment of a quartz stone with cheerful authority, watching Reese inch slightly closer on the bench, she understood that the thing she had protected them from was not only danger. It was also this. And she did not know yet whether that had been right or wrong, only that it was over. And the knowing sat in her chest like a stone of its own. Cassian spoke to her privately in the early afternoon, while the boys played in the garden under the watchful eye of one of his riders. A broad, quiet man named Garrett, who had the particular patience of someone accustomed to waiting out difficult situations. They stood in the cottage, and he placed a document on the table between them. "Lord Aldrich's contract has been nullified by the Crown," he said. "Formally and permanently. Your name has been removed from all records connecting you to his household. You are legally free of any obligation that man ever claimed over you." Kate looked at the document. The crown seal at the bottom was pressed deep into dark wax. She recognized the sigil, had seen it once, on a ring in candlelight. "This took 7 months to arrange," she said. "Some of it," he said. "I wanted to bring you a clean path, not a complicated one." She looked up. "And what does the clean path look like, from where you stand?" He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was choosing words with care, rather than hesitating from uncertainty. She had begun to read the difference. "The boys are my heirs," he said, "by blood and by right. I am not here to take them from you. I am here because they deserve to know what they are, and because you deserve—" He stopped. "Because you should not have had to carry this alone." "I managed," Kate said. "You did more than manage," he said. And it was so direct and so quiet that she had no defense ready for it. "What you built here, what you gave them, I saw it in 20 minutes at a table. You gave them steadiness, safety, themselves." A pause. "You gave them what you were never given." The accuracy of this was so precise that it landed somewhere past her ribs. in the space where she kept things she had never said aloud. "What are you asking?" she said, because she needed him to say it plainly. "I am asking you to come to the capital," he said. "Not as a subject summoned, not under obligation. I am asking you to come because the boys should know their father, and because you should have protection that does not require you to disappear to the edge of the kingdom to manufacture it yourself." He held her gaze. "And because Lord Fenwick's associate, his cousin, Rael, has been making inquiries. He knows the contract was nullified. He is not pleased. His inquiries have included, in the last fortnight, questions about where you might have gone." The cold that moved through Kate was not from the autumn air. "Rael," she repeated. "He has no legal standing," Cassian said. "He has no claim and no recourse. But legal standing has never been the primary concern of men like him, and Ashfin is not protected ground." His voice remained steady, but there was something beneath it. Not quite urgency, but adjacent to it. "I cannot guarantee your safety here. I can guarantee it in the capital." Kate looked at the document on the table, then at the window, where through the wavering old glass she could see the gray outline of her garden, the low stone wall, the path she had walked 10,000 times in 5 years, the life she had built with both hands out of nothing and necessity and love. She had known, when she opened the door yesterday, that she was standing at an ending. She simply had not known what came after. "If I come," she said carefully, "I come as myself, not as a ward, not as a possession, not as an arrangement." She looked at him directly. "I will not be Aldrich's lesson learned too late." "No," Cassian said, with a firmness that left no interpretive space whatsoever. "You will not. And the boys are yours," he said. "In every way that matters, they are yours first. I am asking to be added to that, not to replace it." Outside, Emery's voice rose in a bright arc of protest about something, followed immediately by Reese's lower tone mediating, and then both of them laughing. The sound came through the window glass and filled the small room completely. Kate closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, she reached out and picked up the document from the table, folded it once, carefully, and placed it inside her cloak. "We will need 2 days to be ready," she said. The breath that left Cassian was barely perceptible, but she was standing close enough to notice it, and she filed it away in the part of her that was still learning, still watching, still not yet certain what to do with a man who kept small promises and came alone through the rain. 2 days, he said. "I will be here." The road to the capital took 4 days. Kate had expected the journey to feel like surrender. She had braced for it, the particular hollowness of retreating toward the thing you had fled, of watching the forest thin and the road widen and the village of Ashfin disappear behind a curve of hill as though it had never existed. She had expected grief, or something adjacent to it. What she had not expected was Reese falling asleep against Cassian's arm on the second afternoon, inside the covered wagon, without ceremony or permission, simply listing sideways the way children do when exhaustion overrides everything else, and Cassian going entirely still so as not to wake him. She had not expected Emery to spend the better part of 3 days asking Cassian questions about wolves. Real wolves, forest wolves, the kind that howled at the full moon, with a fascination that was not yet connected to self-knowledge but was clearly circling it, the way water circles a drain before committing to direction. She had not expected Cassian to answer every question with patient, precise honesty, never talking down, never deflecting, simply treating a 5-year-old's curiosity as a thing worthy of real engagement. She had not expected it to be so difficult to maintain her careful distance. She managed it. She sat across the wagon and watched the road, and kept her expression composed, and told herself that gratitude was not the same as trust, and that trust was not the same as whatever more dangerous thing lived beneath it and refused to be named. She was 26 years old, and she had survived Lord Aldrich and a night flight through a sleeping city, and 4 days on a wool merchant's cart, and 5 winters in a cottage at the edge of the grey wood, and she was not going to be undone by a man who went still, so her sleeping son would not be disturbed. She was almost convincing. The capital rose out of the morning mist on the 4th day, like something from the old stories. Stone towers and high walls, and the distant sound of bells marking the hour. The smell of forge smoke and river water, and fresh bread from the market districts below the hill. Kate had seen it once before, 5 years ago. Arriving as Lord Aldrich's ward in a closed carriage with instructions about how to stand and what to say, and how to make herself useful without appearing to try. She arrived this time in an open wagon, with her sons on either side of her, and her grey cloak pulled close and her blonde braid over one shoulder, and she looked at the city with her own eyes and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "This time I am not arriving as anyone's arrangement." The AlphaKing's household received them with the quiet efficiency of a court that had been given instructions and followed them. Kate and the boys were shown to a suite of rooms in the eastern wing. Not guest rooms, she noticed, but rooms that had been prepared with intention. A chamber for her with fresh linens and dried lavender hung near the window. 2 smaller adjoining rooms for the boys, already furnished with straw mattresses and wool blankets, and, inexplicably, a small wooden box in Emery's room that contained 3 smooth river stones, clearly selected to complement his existing collection. She stood holding that box for a long moment before setting it down. The days that followed moved differently than she had anticipated. She had steeled herself for politics, for court intrigue, for assessments and whisper campaigns, for the particular social machinery of a noble household, deciding what to make of an Omega from nowhere, who had arrived with the king's unacknowledged sons, and 5 years of silence to explain. She had prepared arguments, composure, the specific armoring she had learned under Aldrich's roof, and refined in Ashvin's solitude. What she encountered instead was the steady, unremarkable business of being allowed to exist. Cassian did not present her to the court immediately. He did not demand explanations or performances. He arranged for a healer to examine the boys, a gray-haired woman named Sira, who smelled of chamomile and took no nonsense, and who declared both children offensively healthy, with an approval that seemed almost reluctant. He arranged for Kate to have access to the castle's herb stores, having learned somewhere in those 2 days in Ashvin that she had built her living as a healer. He assigned a guard to the eastern wing, not to confine, she understood quickly, but because Rael's inquiries had not yet resolved themselves. And Cassian had said he could guarantee her safety in the capital, and he appeared to mean things he said. Rael's situation resolved itself within the fortnight. Kate was not present for it, but Garrett, the broad, patient rider who had watched the boys in the garden, told her plainly one morning that Lord Fenwick's cousin had been brought before the council, that the full documentation of the original contract and its associated correspondence had been presented as evidence, and that Rael had been stripped of his travel privileges and remanded to his estate under formal censure. The investigation into Fenwick's pack would continue through the winter. There would be no further inquiries about Kate's whereabouts, because Kate's whereabouts were now, officially, the AlphaKing's concern. And men like Rael understood, with instinctive precision, exactly what that meant. She breathed differently after that. She noticed the difference and allowed herself to notice it. It was Cassian who told the boys what they were, not all of it at once. Children receive truth in the portions they can hold. But the first part, the important part, on a quiet evening 3 weeks after their arrival, in the castle's inner courtyard where a fire had been built against the autumn cold. He sat on a low stone bench with both of them beside him and spoke plainly and without performance about wolves, about shifting, about the blood they carried, and what it meant, and why it was nothing to fear. Kate stood in the doorway of the courtyard and watched. Rhys listened with complete stillness, absorbing everything, asking 2 precise questions at the end that demonstrated he had understood far more than the words delivered. Emery cried a little, not from fear, but from the overwhelming size of the information. the particular emotional flooding of a child encountering something enormous about himself. And Cassian did not minimize it or rush him through it. He simply sat with him in it, one large hand resting on Emery's back, steady and present, until the flooding passed, and Emery looked up and said with watery determination, "So we can turn into wolves?" "When you are older and trained," Cassian said. "Yes. Big wolves?" "Given your bloodline," Cassian said, with a gravity that was not entirely free of private feeling. "Almost certainly." Emery turned to Reese. "I want to be bigger than you." "You won't be," Reese said, not unkindly. Kate pressed her hand over her mouth in the doorway and looked at the night sky and felt something she had not felt in 5 years move through her chest. Not pain, not fear. Not the particular vigilant tension of a woman who has been keeping watch alone for so long, she has forgotten what it felt like before. Something that was, cautiously and undeniably, relief. She found Cassian in the map room that night. She had not planned it, had not even fully decided to go until she was already in the corridor, her feet making the decision while her mind was still composing arguments for remaining in her chamber. The map room was where she had last seen him 5 years ago. She did not think this was an accident, her going there. She was honest enough to admit that. He was standing at the long table, not looking at maps, but simply standing, a candle burning low beside him, the way a man stands when he has come somewhere to think, and the thinking has not yet resolved into anything useful. He turned when she entered. "The boys are asleep," she said. "I know, I checked." She looked at him in the candlelight. "You checked." "Garrett mentioned they sometimes wake in new places. I wanted to be certain." She was quiet for a moment. The candle threw warm shadows across the map table, across the spines of the books lining the walls, across the faint scar along his jaw that she had been noticing for 3 weeks and had not yet asked about. "Cassian," she said. "Kate, I need to say something I have not said." She kept her voice level. "I am sorry. For the silence. For the 5 years of it. I understood my reasons. I still understand them. But you lost 5 years with them, and that was a consequence of my choices, and I am sorry for it." He was quiet for long enough that she felt the apology land, felt it be received rather than deflected. "I am sorry," he said, "that the world you were placed in left you no choice that did not cost you something." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and stood at the other side of the map table, close enough that the candlelight caught both of them in the same warm circle. "What happens now?" she asked. The same question she had asked in the cottage, but a different question entirely. "That depends," he said carefully, "on what you want." "I want my sons to know their father," she said. "I want to be safe without having to disappear to manufacture it. I want—" She stopped. The thing she had been refusing to name for 3 weeks pressed forward, patient and persistent. "I want to stop being afraid of wanting things." Cassian moved around the end of the table, not quickly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to redirect, to rebuild the careful distance she had been maintaining. She did not step back. He stopped close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. Those winter water eyes that had been watching her steadily for 5 years in her memory and 3 weeks in reality. "I have not stopped thinking about you," he said quietly. "Not in 5 years. Not once." "You're the Alpha King," she said. "You had an entire kingdom to think about." "Yes," he said, "and I still did not stop." She looked at him, at the candle shadows on his face, at the scar she finally asked about. A border skirmish 3 years ago, a blade he had not moved away from fast enough because he had been thinking about something else, he said. And she chose to believe that, and also not to ask what. and at the expression he was wearing now, which was open in a way she suspected very few people ever saw. She reached out and placed her hand over his on the edge of the map table. Small, deliberate, a choice. His fingers turned and closed gently around hers. They stood like that in the candlelight while the castle settled into night around them. And Kate felt the last of the long watchfulness in her chest ease, not vanish, because she was not a woman who would ever stop watching entirely, and she had made her peace with that. But ease, soften, make room. They were married in the winter, in the castle's great hall, with stone walls hung in deep blue cloth and candles burning in iron sconces, and the smell of pine boughs and beeswax filling every corner. It was not a grand state ceremony. Those would come later, with their own weight and pageantry. But a true binding, spoken before the council and the household, and two dark-haired boys who stood very straight in their new wool tunics and took the occasion with the seriousness it deserved. Rhys did not cry. He stood with his hands folded and watched the ceremony with those pale blue eyes that missed nothing. And at the end, when the binding words had been spoken and the hall began to breathe again, he looked up at Kate and said simply, "Good." Emery cried immediately, and without embarrassment. And when Kate knelt to hold him, he said into her shoulder that he was not sad, he was just very full, and she understood this completely because she was also very full, and they held each other in the middle of the great hall while the candles burned, and Cassian crouched beside them both and said nothing, only stayed. Lord Aldrich's estate was absorbed into the Crown holdings that same winter. The last of Fenwick's alliance collapsed before the new year. The documents that had once made Kate a contracted arrangement were burned in the council hearth, in a brief formal ceremony that no one attended except Cassian, Kate, and old Sira the healer, who said it was about time and accepted a cup of spiced wine. In the spring, Kate established a healing practice within the castle walls. Real work, her own work, drawing on 5 years of Ashvan knowledge and the considerably better resources of a royal herb store. Sira, who had been looking for an apprentice for a decade, attached herself to this development with the satisfaction of someone whose patience had finally been vindicated. Rhys, at 6, began his first lessons with the castle's gamma trainer. Serious, focused, already demonstrating a stillness in practice that made the trainer write a very careful report to Cassian about the elder son's particular nature. Cassian read it and smiled in the private way he had, and showed Kate, and she read it and thought, of course. Emery, given the choice of training or continued rock collection, negotiated a schedule that accommodated both, which Cassian found deeply unsurprising, and Kate found completely characteristic. The boys grew. The seasons turned. The cottage at the edge of the Grey Wood became a memory Kate visited sometimes with something that was not quite nostalgia, more like respect. She had built something real there, in that small, cold space. It had held them when nothing else would. She did not regret it, and she did not miss it. And both of those things were true at once. On the night of the first anniversary of their binding, Cassian found her in the map room again. She had developed a habit of reading there in the evenings, surrounded by the smell of old leather and parchment and the low burn of candles. He came in and sat across the table from her without announcement, the way he came into rooms now, as though her presence in a space was sufficient reason to be in it. She looked up from her book. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in a candle-lit room 5 years ago, as though she had thoughts worth hearing, as though she was someone worth seeing clearly. "Anything interesting?" he asked, nodding at the book. "A history of the eastern provinces," she said. "My mother's family came from there. I thought I should know more about it." He nodded, reached across the table and turned the book slightly to read the title, and in doing so brought his hand near enough that she could have reached for it if she chose to. She chose to. His fingers closed around hers, warm and certain, the same gesture as the winter before, which had been the same gesture as the map room 5 years before that. a line drawn through time, connecting the girl who had been someone's contract to the woman who had decided, in full knowledge and complete freedom, where she wished to belong. The candles burned. The castle was quiet. Somewhere in the eastern wing, 2 dark-haired boys slept in rooms that were theirs, in a home that was theirs, in a life that no document, no arrangement, no man with silver rings and careful voice could touch. Kate held her husband's hand in the candlelight and thought, "It is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything I did not know I was building toward. All those years I thought I was only surviving." And the story, which had begun with flight and fear, and a borrowed wool cart and a winter road north, ended here, not with a door closing, but with a window open, and the smell of spring coming through it, and the particular quiet of a life that had finally, fully, become her own.